I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your home for deer hunting news, stories, and strategies. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and this is episode number 29. Today on the show, we're kicking off the most wonderful time of year for deer hunters, the rut. And joining us is Field & Stream whitetail expert Scott Bestul. Enjoy, and then get out there in the woods. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I am stoked to be here today for two reasons. Number one, the rut is right around the corner. And number two, joining me and Dan on the show today is Scott Bestul, an avid deer hunter and whitetail columnist and blogger for Field & Stream magazine. Welcome to the show, Scott.
Thanks so much, Mark. It's great to be here. Hi, Dan. How are you today?
Doing good.
Yeah, we're thrilled to have you on the show, Scott. We've gotten to chat a bit in the past about the rut, and today we're hoping to talk about that topic really for the whole Wired to Hunt nation, and it's that awesome time of year. And that said, for those maybe that aren't as familiar with you and what you've been doing, can you kick us off to start with a little bit about what you're doing today in the whitetail world?
Well, you mean professionally? I've been writing for Field & Stream for about 20 years, and I was a avid freelancer and remain that way. I've sold stories to most of the major outdoor magazines, and it's kind of fun to make your living doing something you're passionate about.
Definitely. And so that probably means you get to do a lot of whitetail hunting in the meantime when you're not writing, right?
That's a great comment. One of my daughter's a 15-year-old teenager, a sophomore now, and she's had kids come up to her and say, "Is it true your dad is like a professional deer hunter?" She just laughs. She's like, "No, my dad is a professional writer," there's a huge difference there.
Very true. I've in just the short year or so that I've been doing this, I've come to find that there's a whole lot more writing than hunting, more than I thought.
Yeah, really, it's kind of a cruel joke. We get into this because we want to do something that we love, and we find out that in order to make money, you actually don't get paid to deer hunt. But that said, I am spoiled compared to some people. I mean, as you guys know, it's when you're in this business, you get a little more time to hunt than maybe the average Joe. And I used to be a teacher, and I know I hunt a heck of a lot more now than I did then.
Nice. Yeah, I can definitely relate. And I guess that said then, before we really dive into our main topic today being the rut, we'd be really interested to hear about how your deer season has been going so far, Scott. So how's the hunting been?
It's been kind of slow for me, which is kind of ironic. I mean, I had the best probably trail camera summer that I've ever had. I've got some wonderful bucks on camera, and our age structure here in southeast Minnesota just keeps getting better and better, and so I'm really, really excited. But so far as what I've seen from the stand, I haven't laid eyes on any of the big guys I know are there. So, but it's just a matter of time. I mean, through many years of deer hunting, I've learned to be patient and just be ready when it happens. And one of these days, it's going to happen.
Yeah, it's getting to be that time of year too when it could happen. So.
Exactly.
That's exciting. Now, are you hunting just at home, or are you traveling at all already so far this year?
I have not traveled. I've hunted northern Wisconsin just a little bit. I hunt the big woods on public land up there, and we'll be returning here. I'm not sure. It's kind of fluid. I hunt with a friend up there, and he hunts down here with me, and so we just kind of, one guy tags out one place, or it gets really hot, in one place, we just communicate, and so I'll be flipping back and forth between those two spots, and then actually hunting southern Indiana this fall for the very first time in a couple of weeks. So I'm looking forward to that. I've never hunted there.
Oh, nice. I don't want to dive too far down this path, but I'm actually, just as of a couple days ago, I'm going to be hunting southern Indiana too. So
awesome.
Yeah, when are you heading down there?
It'll be around the 10th of November. So that's when our firearm season starts here in Minnesota, and it was just kind of good timing for me. I do firearms hunt quite a bit. In fact, I'll be in Illinois for their first shotgun opener, but I like to have a bow in my hands, and that was an opportunity that came up, so that's when I'm going to head down there.
Awesome. I'll be down there just beforehand, so I'll be able to give you an update on how the rut's progressing. I'm actually going to be heading there, I think, this Thursday or Friday, and then staying till around the 5th.
Oh, wonderful. Well, good. That'll be a good time down there, I would suspect.
Yeah, I hope so. There's a cold front hitting here in a couple days, and this is me getting off on a tangent here, but my opportunities down here in southern Michigan on my home properties here, I got a couple spots, and as Dan, as you know, as we've been talking about in the podcast over the past couple episodes, it's just been looking really dire compared to most years here. Have hardly had any mature bucks on camera during the summer, and had two over the entire summer, just like a couple random midnight sightings, and then since August haven't had a single for sure mature deer on camera, and none of my neighbors are seeing them. Just a really weird situation. So it's been a little disheartening, and I got to thinking a week or two, I guess it was really last week, do I really want to waste 6-7 days hunting all day here in early November, or would it be worth trying to find a different opportunity in another state? And so I started looking at some public land and started texting a bunch of friends in some different spots in Indiana, Kentucky, just trying to see if they knew of any decent spots to check out on public. And long story short, a friend of a friend ended up, being willing to let a guy hunt on one of his larger properties. So I got a spot to check out for a few days, and gonna head in there and try to learn a new property kind of as I go, but excited to be in an area with some really good mature deer numbers, and it'll be a fun adventure.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. There's nothing more exciting to me than to go to some place you've never been before, and just, you just kind of take the knowledge you have and try to figure things out, and it's exciting.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So Dan, sort of on this topic, I know that you've had a little bit of excitement recently. Do you want to fill us in on how the last couple of weeks or week or so has been going for you hunting?
Well, this past weekend, I would say, as far as trail cameras are concerned, I didn't see a lot from the stand, but my trail cameras are starting to heat up. I moved them over top of scrapes and stuff, and a lot of the deer that have been hanging around all summer are still on the property. And I actually had an encounter with a really good 3-year-old. I believe he was a 3-year-old, somewhere about 140-ish, maybe 145 class 9 pointer that I ended up passing. And he was the only buck that I saw that was worth anything on this past weekend. So that gave me some high hopes, and just checking trail cameras and making sure that everything is in order for Saturday is when I start filming my buddy Ryan until he tags out, and then he'll get behind the camera if he tags out, and then film me the rest of the vacation.
Gosh, that's got to be exciting knowing that's here just on the horizon.
Yeah, let's see, 14 days, I believe, and try to lay down 2 deer in 14 days, and I think we can do it.
Yeah, I think so too. And man, it is just last night and today and the last couple of days, I've just been getting the shakes, just so excited because this whole thing's about to pop here. And that's really what I wanted to focus our conversation here today on, Scott, is the whitetail rut. You know, it's when this podcast goes live, it's going to be October 30th, and that's just about that time of year where across most of the country, the rut is just starting to get revving. And so today I was hoping to pick your brain, Scott, about all things related to the rut, you know, in an effort to get our listeners as prepared as possible for, you know, what I like to call the whitetail Super Bowl. This is really, everyone goes all in, and lots of times these next couple weeks can make or break someone's season. So to kick things off, Scott, I'm curious, you kind of touched on it just a bit, but could you fill us in on what your plans are for the next couple weeks of hunting the rut? You said maybe Indiana and maybe Illinois even, but where exactly are you going to be, and what's your plan there?
Well, I tell you, until about the 10th of November, I'll be hunting primarily at home here in southeastern Minnesota on kind of a mix of public and private that I hunt. I'm fortunate enough I have 2 or 3 different farms I can hunt on, plus quite a bit of public ground, and that's where most of my scouting effort has gone for through the summer and early fall. And so anyway, right now, as we prep for that, you know, October 30th Halloween time frame, I've been doing a lot of speed scouting, popping in areas where I know are, you know, typically good rub lines and areas for scraping, and just checking to see where the real hottest sign is. And then when it's go time, and like you said, we've got some cold weather coming. It's just, as both you guys know, you get a good cold front this time of year, and it's like flipping a switch. They're off to the races, and we got to be sitting in a tree waiting for them.
Yeah, that's the truth. Now, something you just touched on there when it comes to scouting, you said you're looking for different types of sign, like rub lines and stuff. Maybe to kick off, could you elaborate on what kind of sign you're paying attention to at this time of year, and how you might be factoring that into your hunting strategy?
Well, I found that in the late pre-rut, that scrapes are a lot more important than they are later on, and so my primary focus right now is going to be for the next few days is going to be hunting scrapes. My buddy just called me the other day, actually texted me from his tree stand, and he said I'm in a really good staging area with lots of scrapes. You know, he was well off a food source, but you know, this is a good scraping area that kind of funneled deer into it before bucks would head out to feed at night. And he saw 3 great bucks that evening and passed a shot on one at 14 yards. So anyway, that's so it kind of morphs for me. I hunt scrapes early, pay attention to where rubs are, and because for me, when I find rubs going through travel routes, and I know, you know, when bucks start covering a lot of ground, they're going to be, you know, doing that as quickly as possible, and using terrain funnels to get from place to place and search for does. And so then I kind of switch to that and mix it up, you know, get on food sources once in a while in the evening and see where the does are going to be. And as you guys both know, if you don't know where your does are this time of year, you better start scrambling, because that's where the bucks are going to wind up eventually.
So true.
Now, you mentioned that you're hunting over scrapes now and for the next week or so. Now, are you running trail cameras over top of these scrapes as well, or how do you use your trail cameras to, I guess, determine where you're going to be hunting?
That's a great question, man. I'm still kind of tweaking that formula, Dan. I really I found that some bucks are kind of I don't know if it's camera shy. I was just talking to a good friend of mine from Illinois about this last night. He had shot a great deer. We were talking about trail cameras, and he said, you know, I don't think they necessarily spook bucks, but they just see something in their world that doesn't compute with them, and they get kind of funky about it. So I don't, if I'm planning to hunt a specific set of scrapes, I don't usually hang cameras right on those. That's just my personal preference. I know some guys have really good luck with that, but I'll go, you know, off that action just a little bit, just to kind of get an idea of, you know, what bucks are coming through, what times of day they're moving. So I like a scrape near a food source, like a field edge or a food plot, because bucks are usually hitting those at night, and my stand locations usually aren't there. But I prefer to keep my stand locations slightly off of where I have cameras, just because, you know, I'm going in and out of there. I'm checking them every once in a while, and if a buck is acting funky around that camera, I don't want to hunt a buck that's any tenser than he needs to be. It's hard enough as it is.
Got it. Makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it does. Now, sticking on the scrape topic, if someone is trying to hunt scrapes in this next week or so, you kind of mentioned, you touched on this just a bit, but from everything I've seen and experienced, it seems like the scrapes to be hunting are not those that are anywhere near field edges and stuff. Could you talk a little bit about the areas that can work for scrapes?
That's a great question. And sometimes field-edge scrapes are okay, but as a rule, I tend to avoid them. It kind of depends on the situation. But I just hung 2 sets last week, or actually brushed out the areas on public land. And it was a broad valley bottom, and it kind of, there's several different, that system, that creek bottom that goes through there connects several major ridges that happen to have good farm fields on top where I know deer are feeding. And so I got 2 sets prepped there and that big valley bottom, and I know deer are going to be comfortable coming through there any time of day, and it's quite a hike down in there. Like I said, it's public land, and I just plan on I'll be sitting both of those sets at some point, starting Halloween and that first week in November, and I expect to just go in there, haul a bunch of stuff with me, and sit all day.
Nice. That sounds like right in line with kind of my thoughts too on what can work for scrapes, and try getting in those areas where they might hit them during daylight. Now, Dan, I know that we talked earlier about kind of getting Scott's thoughts on different setups and stuff. Did you want to kind of chat about that right here?
Yeah. So let's break this rut down into two sections, like the very first round of does and then the second round of does. And I guess where the hunters are seeing a lot of the action is where the buck breaks off the first doe and then goes to the second doe. Can you explain to us where you're going to be hunting, let's say, that first part as opposed to the second part, and maybe give some details there?
Okay. Well, early on, before that first doe or group of does starts to pop, I tend to kind of switch it up. I mean, I'm hunting the freshest buck sign, but I'm also really monitoring where my does are and knowing that bucks are going to show up in those areas. We've seen this time and time again here in southeastern Minnesota, where morning hunts, bucks are, they're cruising ground, they're popping between doe bedding areas, and so I'm typically kind of back in the timber in terrain funnels that I know are going to connect those areas, and sitting as long as I can during the day. However, if it's not happening there, sometimes, or I just don't feel like sitting all day. I mean, let's face it, it's a tough road when you're sitting in a tree stand for 10, 12 hours. So I may just, the last 2-3 hours of light, I may pop out towards the food source that I know does are inhabiting, and bucks are going to be nosing around there. So that's kind of my strategy early. And then when you're talking about that second pulse of does, you're talking about after the peak rut is passed and they're kind of getting that second group. Dan, is that right?
Yeah, let's say like halfway through November.
Okay. Yeah, and that's it's interesting. A lot of guys get discouraged that time frame because they kind of know that first big flush of activity is gone, and if they haven't tagged out, it's easy to get discouraged. But I kind of get pumped up myself because, in my opinion, a lot of those young bucks that you see running willy-nilly across the landscape, they're kind of running out of gas. And so the bucks that you see in that mid-November time frame are sometimes the big guys, because they've got the endurance. They're just going to keep pushing and push until they fall over the last doe's breath. Anyway, then I switch to I just go back to kind of that 1-2 punch. I mean, I'm hitting terrain funnels in the morning, but I do concentrate a little bit more on food sources in the evening, because those bucks they just keep coming back to them, looking for that last hot doe.
So let's zero in on that first piece you talked about there, which is the terrain funnels, because funnels, pinch points, these are topics and words that are thrown around all the time when people are talking about the rut. But for some people, maybe there might be still some questions here. So Scott, can you give us some real detail in regards to what a terrain funnel, what kind of terrain would constitute as a funnel for you? What might those places look like? And then how are you specifically setting up in an area like that?
Okay. Well, I think one of the easiest ways to learn funnels, at least it was for me, a good friend of mine taught me this. He's a logger and an excellent deer hunter, and he's always looking at big picture scenarios. In other words, he's not worried so much about how a buck is going to cross from point A to point B that's 200 yards long. He backs off even further, looks at an aerial photo, and says, okay, what are these trails and buck sign connecting that might be a half a mile or a mile away. Now granted, he hunts big woods deer, and that's where I hunt with him, and so those deer put on a lot more miles. So you're looking for me, bucks are creatures of the edge. I mean, they're always, even in a big woods scenario, they're going to be following, some little faint line of brush that, at first might not be really obvious to us, but if you pay attention to where you're finding rubs and scrapes, and if you're fortunate enough to see deer move through there, they're almost always got their side up against some cover where they feel safe. That's just the nature of bucks. So I'm looking for, a little brushy line of cover, or if you can get water, a creek bed, that's to me one of the ultimate terrain funnels. I hunt western Kansas every year, and creeks and brushy fence lines. I mean, those deer really run big out there. They'll cover miles looking for a single doe, but they'll almost always do it using some kind of cover like that. And so a creek bed is excellent. I hunt here in southeastern Minnesota. It's really ridge, it's bluff country, big ridges punctuated by farm fields on top and bottom. And I'm always looking for the ways that bucks are going to travel through those ridges and across those ridges to get to the next, doe bedding area, food source, et cetera. So, anytime you get a saddle and a ridge, a bench along one side or along the end, I'm sure, we've all heard this before, but, mature bucks, in my opinion, they're basically lazy critters. I mean, they want to take the easiest path that they can where they don't have to struggle. And so they're going to, rather than bust it straight up a ridge, they're going to follow a contour around. So anytime I find a flat spot on hilly terrain that immediately catches my attention, I'm walking it, looking for rub lines and trails, et cetera. So yeah, you just, it's kind of like a fisherman needs to read a lake. I mean, you need to look at a map and be able to say, oh, this is the way a buck is going to, get from point A to point B. He's going to follow this structure. He's going to take the easiest route, and think. Don't be afraid to think big picture. He's not just living on your farm. He's going to the next farm. How's he going to get from that farm to you, and be waiting for him there?
Yeah. So moving on then to the second piece, and all that makes all the sense in the world. Now, let's say you've been hunting your terrain funnels, like you'd mentioned, at this time of year, maybe earlier in the day. Now it gets into the evening, and you're thinking about moving to a food source. Can you tell us a little bit about what kind of food source you're looking for to set up on during the rut, and what's going through your mind when you're planning on how you're going to set up on that food source, how close, what how you're going to think about the wind and all those things?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because food sources are touchy places to hunt, as both of you guys know. When deer are hitting one spot consistently, I mean, it doesn't take a lot of hunter interaction for you to goof it up in a hurry. So if I can find out where most of the deer are entering a food source and back off that just a little bit, and the main reason I'm concerned about that is, if I'm right on the food source and I start busting deer, it's going to make them hesitant to come back there on a consistent basis. And the other thing is, when it comes dark and if I haven't tagged my buck yet, I got to find a way to get out of there without spooking deer on the source. So, being a guy that hunts farm country quite a bit, I mean, that's pretty typical of what I hunt around here in Minnesota. I'm looking for, as soon as I set up a stand or think about setting up a stand, I'm thinking, how do I back out of here? How do I get out of here because I know, evening's going to come. There's going to be deer on the cut corn or a soybean field or a food plot or alfalfa field. I got to get out of there without being detected. So that's kind of one of my first concerns when I hunt an afternoon food source, is getting out undetected. And sometimes if I do decide to sit right on the food, which on occasion is the best thing to do, I've got a couple buddies here, and we just have a system worked out where we'll text each other or call each other on the cell phone and say, hey, I'm sitting on this cornfield, which stand, come out here and get me, and we'll just drive out in the truck and bump the deer off, pick the guy up, and then drive out. And the deer are, in this country, a farm truck is nothing to them. They aren't spooked by it at all.
Yeah, I've tried that before too, and it seems to work pretty well without, like you said, without spooking them too much. Now, how do you feel, when let's say you've got a food plot you're hunting, and maybe you're just off of it a little bit, How are you factoring in the wind when deciding where on that food plot you want to hunt? Because, of course, I imagine you want to make sure that you're not getting winded, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how a buck might be using wind to approach that food plot or to check that food plot. Is that something you think about when planning your setup?
Now, a lot of you guys are familiar with the old hunting tradition of eating, some organ, the heart or a chunk of liver off the first animal you kill. I had that when I was a little kid, and it was a big deal. Organ meats were always prized by frontier people who knew the importance of getting a lot of different minerals and nutrients. And as often is the case, those guys were onto something, because organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. And you can get the same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil, made exclusively from regeneratively raised, grass-fed, and finished cattle. Heart and Soil's unique freeze-drying process means all those important nutrients are trapped in, ensuring you experience every one of the benefits of nature's superfood in a clean, convenient, taste-free capsule. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And make sure to use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. That's heartandsoil.co. Use the code MeatEater. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Absolutely. I can't remember the name of the guy. He's a well-known deer hunter, and it was 20 years ago. He wrote something that I have remembered ever since. He said the best wind for killing a big buck is the wind that's almost wrong for you and almost perfect for the deer. So I like to look at a food plot or any food source from several different directions. Consider it under several different wind directions. And that night, whatever afternoon I hunted, depending on the wind, I mean, there's some winds that are just going to be dead wrong for it, whatever, and then I never go in there. But if there's a couple different wind directions that I can get by with, I think bucks tend to like to, quarter into the wind, or, in some cases have the wind right in their face. Some days they don't care, but, you can't gamble on that. And so I like to set up so I'm, as I mentioned before, so the wind is just perfect for the deer, but maybe there's a little bend in the trail where I can get by with it, where it seems, he thinks he's walking with his nose in the wind the entire time, but because of this bend in the trail, he's going to be exposed for, 20, 30, 40 yards where he doesn't have it in his face, and I've got it perfect for me. That's a constant consideration. Bucks use the wind, and even when they don't, even in those goofy times when they're not using the wind, they're definitely going to, pay attention to you if they catch you. So, just that playing that wind game is just it's a constant challenge. You have to always be thinking about it.
Yeah, it's definitely always on my mind too. That's for sure.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you were hunting on some bedding areas. Now, in terms of bedding areas, what are you looking for to determine that it is a bedding area? And then when you do go in there and hunt it, are you hunting all day, or just a morning, or just an evening?
I tend to hunt bedding areas all day if I know that's what I'm going into, and I've got a couple sets that are specifically set up that way. Here in bluff country, the deer tend to like to bed high. They like to bed on the end of ridges, and I've found that fairly consistent behavior, wherever I've gone. But in this country, where the hills are very exaggerated, those ridge ends are just killer. I mean, there's just something about the deer can bed there, whether it's a buck or a doe. They can bed there, and they can lay and have the wind at their back and be staring the other way where they don't have the wind. And if they're gonna, if they detect danger, they 2 hops and they're out of there. So in my country, that's a classic bedding area, and I've got a couple different stands hung in spots like that. And our deer, in both cases, the deer are feeding in farm fields that are out on that same ridge, and then as dawn comes, they're working their way back towards the ridge end. And so what I do is I come up from the bottom of the hill, so I'm avoiding that farm field completely in the morning. I don't want to blow out the very deer I'm hunting. I crawl up there in the dark, I get settled in that stand, and then I try to just grind it out all day long, and I make sure that I've got a wind that's pushing my scent off of the end of the ridge. And so I hang my stand right on the ridge end. So, and I'm, 15, 20 feet up in the air. And so if I've got a wind that's blowing from that farm field out to the end of the ridge, even if the deer circles downwind to me, say if I rattle or grunt to him or he's chasing a doe, there's no way that deer is going to pick up my wind. So that's kind of my classic favorite morning bedding area sit.
Is that a spot where you're seeing activity from bucks checking those areas all throughout the day? Or, like you mentioned, there was just a morning spot and you're moving on elsewhere?
That's a great question. In fact, probably one of the best days I ever had last year was one of our absolute coldest days. It was November 21st, and I think it was 5 degrees straight temperature, and we had like a 15-mile-an-hour wind. It was just brutal. And I hiked up the hill to this bedding spot that I told you about earlier. It's hung on a skinny little elm tree, but I've got good cedars behind me for a back cover. And I thought, man, I knew it was going to be cold. I'm like, man, if I can hang in here till noon, I'll probably get a shot. And so anyway, I strapped my warm clothing to my backpack and hiked up there in pretty light clothes, got to the base of the tree, put all my clothes on, crawled up there, and 4 hours later, I had not seen a hair. I mean, I hadn't seen even a fawn. And I was just thinking about limping out and saying, okay, I'm not man enough for this anymore. I better get out of here. And I looked up, and here comes the doe. And she had 4 bucks behind her.
Wow.
And they all slid right in through my, just perfect. I mean, couldn't have just mapped it any better. I mean, they were all within 15 yards. And they moved out. And then the shooter came, and he, of course, didn't play the game. I don't know why that works the way it does, but they had kind of made a loop around the end of the ridge and were working their way off. And instead of swinging right under my stand like every other deer had done, he just kind of cut across and walked out of my life and wouldn't respond to rattling or grunting or anything. He knew where he was going. But anyway, so I thought, well, man, I looked at my watch. It was, by then it was 12:30, and I'd seen 4 different bucks, and then another smaller one came through later, and I thought, well, man, this is just getting nothing but better, and so I'm going to hang here till the end. And I never saw a deer the rest of the day, and I thought about that hunt so many times because I thought, if I got in there early and sat for just a couple hours, I would have never seen a thing. If I'd have gotten in there late, sat for a couple hours, I'd have never seen a thing. So I think there's a lot more midday movement going on than a guy thinks. And Dan, I actually shot one of my nicer Iowa bucks down there by where you hunt. And I had seen a couple deer early in the morning and then nothing, and I just was determined to grind it out. And by golly, at noon, that deer came through, and I was able to rattle them in and shoot them at about 15 yards. So I think there's a lot more midday movement going on, and when you're hunting bedding areas, you just kind of have to count on that.
Man, I am not a fan of hunting all day. I have.
I don't blame you. You can't sugarcoat it. It's just terrible.
I got bad knees and the stands are too small, and oh man, I could sit here and complain about that forever. But you mentioned
it's so true. I mean, I've actually had days where I'm up there and you've been up there so long, it's like I forget I'm even in a tree, and I'm so glad I got my safety belt on because I could just pitch right off the stand.
It's a grind. It is definitely a grind, that's for sure.
Now you mentioned calling. How much calling, rattling, grunting, snort wheezing, whatever, do you do? And is it blind calling, or are you calling only when you see a deer?
That's a great question, man. I wish I had the right answer because I generally I call less now probably than I ever have. I prefer to call the deer that I see just because I know I can judge their reaction. I can judge their body language and their mood at the moment and how they're responding to that calling. So that's my ideal. I carry my rattling antlers on every hunt from the middle of September all the way till the end of late season. But I use them pretty sparingly. When I know things are really rocking, when I see bucks that are cruising and they're out looking, I don't hesitate to blind rattle. However, I'm very, very picky about my setup. Well, let's just go back to that ridge end as an example. If I've got a spot like that where I know a buck is incapable of getting my wind, I'm a lot more liberal with my rattling. If I've got a spot where, the wind is kind of iffy, like we described that scenario before where, everything's almost perfect for the buck and everything's almost wrong for you, I almost never rattle wind because I know that buck, 90% of the bucks are going to come in downwind and he's going to get me eventually. And I hate that. It's like, geez, I could have killed that deer if I had just put my horns away. So I'm pretty picky about when I call and rattle. And I'm big on, you guys know this, but Mark Jury just pops to my mind as just a calling master and a guy that knows how to, read deer body language and know when a deer is vulnerable to calling. And I've picked up a lot of great tips listening to Mark and other experts like that, that, really kind of use calling as a finishing tool or, more of a, I'm going to call to that deer when I know he's in the mood, when I know he's vulnerable. And if I think there's any chance he's not, I'm not messing with it.
So Scott, can you share with us what that situation might look like when, can you walk us through, okay, you've seen a buck, what are you looking for to determine whether or not he's vulnerable to calling? Can you tell us, what's going to make you call? What's going to make you say, hey, I'm going to stop calling now? Can you kind of walk us through that whole situation so that one of our listeners might be able to apply some of these tips that you're mentioning if they actually have a buck in the field and they want to try something like this?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Yeah, well, if you're a turkey hunter, I think some of these things will be kind of obvious to you because a lot of times we can watch a gobbler, like a field gobbler, and kind of, read how he's responding to our calls, and bucks are kind of the same way. So, let's say I'm up in a tree stand, I've got a buck and he's walking, and I know he can't get my wind right now. He's upwind to me. And if he's not coming in for a shot, there's no way I'm not calling to that deer. Or I've got to call to him because, he's going to walk out of your life no matter what. So you might as well call to him. So first thing I do is I will make a soft contact grunt at him, or maybe, use a bleat can to kind of get his attention. And then I look for some cue that buck has heard me. And in my belief, they'll almost always give you some indication that they've heard you. They'll stop, they'll lay an ear back, they'll look around, and if they don't do that, my immediate reaction is he doesn't know I'm here yet. So I'll just amp it up. I'll grunt louder, and if he doesn't hear that, I'll tickle a rattling horns just to get his attention. It's important to remember that when bucks are in the rut, they're walking through the woods and they're breathing hard, they're crunching leaves, they're snapping twigs, and a lot of times, they don't hear that first few contact grunts we give them. So in my opinion, it's important to get their attention. And then they'll usually give you, once they've heard you, they'll give you some kind of indication. If he stops and snaps his head and looks right at you, I'm thinking, oh, he's interested, he's looking. And then I try not to call when a buck is looking at me. I like to have him, focused off of me for just a second. And one of my good friends is an excellent deer hunter, calls it getting in their head. He said, if sometimes they'll snap at you and they'll snap their heads, they'll look right at you, and then they might relax immediately and kind of look away. And then he says, I just pop them with another grunt right away. And just, to kind of get that thing in their head, like, hey man, there's a buck over here, or there's a doe sitting there, and, you need to come over there and check her out. But if he does something, kind of sheepish or timid, like, tuck his tail or kind of look around like, what was that? I just back off it immediately. They'll usually give you some kind of cue. And it's funny, Dan, you guys that hunt southern Iowa, you bang horns together and they just come and dust their antlers on your tree, don't they?
Well, some of the young ones do. That's a fact.
Exactly.
It's a little different here in Michigan.
Yeah, it's the same in Minnesota. I've had dramatically good results to rattling here in Minnesota, and I've cracked the horns together and watched bucks just tuck that tail in and go, I'm out of here. So it's a huge difference in rattling response depending on where you hunt, and I think anybody that tells you different is not being truthful.
I can tell you right now, Scott, I have ruined way more hunts with calling than I have been successful with them. So,
yep.
So over rattling back in my back in my younger days, I was a rattling machine, thinking that every deer wanted to come check out a pair of rattling antlers, and that just wasn't the case.
Exactly.
It's definitely
Yeah,
high
I
risk,
couldn't
high
agree
reward.
more. Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I just said it's definitely high risk, high reward at times.
Yeah, that's a great explanation of it. It's kind of like you're swinging for the bleachers, and like I said, when I know, I had a day last year. Trying to think if it was the 5th. I think it was the 5th of November. That's my birthday. I always hunt all day on my birthday. That's my present to myself. And
You
That's
deserve
my
it.
birthday too. November
Is
5th
it
is
really?
my birthday too. Yep.
All right, I knew there was something I liked about you.
It's not my 9 fingers, is it?
Yeah. But I had a great rattling day, and it was here in southeastern Minnesota. And I think I hit the horns just 3 times through the whole morning, and each time I had a buck of some size come check me out. One was a dandy 3-year-old, and and he just didn't have. Well, we are under 4-point rule here, and he was a 3-year-old 6-point, and
Wow.
so he was off limits to me anyway. But it just had a great day. And so there are times when it's just rocking, when those rattling horns are like a magic tool, and there's other times when you just need to put a piece of duct tape around those things and put them in your backpack.
Yeah. So, Scott, what's your typical rattling sequence look like? I know I've been with some guys that just smash them together for a minute, and you think it's just kind of crazy. And then there's some people that just like to tickle them. What does your typical rattling look like?
A lot of it depends on the cover. When I hunt western Kansas, which is big open stuff, and I know the deer that I'm hunting right now could be a half a mile away from me. There could be a buck cutting across the prairie out there that I can't even see, and I've got to get his attention. So I tend to rattle a little louder out there. I mean, I always start soft, just under the assumption that, hey, there might be a buck, fairly close here, and I don't want to freak him out. I just want him to be curious. So I'll start, with a pretty soft sequence, and I don't know if tickling is, if it's probably descriptive for the beginning of it. I might amp it up just a little bit towards the end, and then I'll just kind of put the horns down and wait, thinking that, well, if there's anything close, he's going to come, come check that out if he's in the mood. And then again, if I'm out, so I'll give it a little bit, and then I might do another sequence that's quite a bit louder. But again, I'm doing that loud cracking sequence, and I'll hit the horns fairly hard together right at the base, and then start kind of mashing tines together. But I don't do that much here around home. I do more of this kind of more subdued rattling. But when I'm out in Kansas or someplace where I know I got to reach out a little bit, I'm not afraid to use volume. And the thing that taught me that was I was doing a story once on how well deer hear, and I took the kids, my 2 kids. I have twins. And I said, I want you to I'm going to blow a grunt call, and I'm going to hit some rattling antlers. And when you hear me, I want you to throw up this red flag. And so I'd go off 50 yards and, tickle the horns. They're like, yeah, duh, Dad, no kidding, I can hear you, And then I'd get out 100 yards, and it would take a half second, and they'd whip that flag up. And, I got out 300-400 yards, and, depending on what the wind was doing, they really didn't hear me that well. And so, granted, deer can hear better than humans, but not a whole lot better. And when you throw in windy conditions and crunchy leaves, sometimes, I don't think they hear as well as we think they do. So,
Yeah.
Again, I think you have to kind of adjust your rattling to the conditions, not only the terrain and cover that you hunt, but, what's the wind doing? Is it crunchy leaves when the deer walk through the woods? Are they making noise, et cetera?
Definitely. So, speaking of, you mentioned maybe leaves, noise created by wind and stuff, kind of brings me to a different topic that I kind of want to segue here, and that is different factors that can influence the timing or intensity of the rut. And so, as we've all heard, there's all sorts of debate around what impacts the timing of the rut, and then, what might change what we see of rutting activity. So, Scott, we'd actually talked about this a little bit, I think, back when we did an interview for the Rules of the Rut podcast, but I was hoping maybe you could give us again your opinions on what you believe influences the timing of the rut, and then what are your thoughts on different factors that maybe impact what we see? Maybe that's weather, changes in pressure, wind, etc. Could you elaborate on those 2 points for us?
Sure. I officially resign any title that puts me as an expert in this category when it comes to rut timing. Okay.
Okay.
I refuse to wear that hat.
Duly noted.
Everything I read from biology is that the basic timing of the rut is pretty well carved in stone according to the region, and I have no reason to disbelieve that. So does the moon, kick the rut back 2 weeks, as much as 2 weeks in any given year? I'm not saying it couldn't, but I'm skeptical. But anyway, what I do think you brought up a much more important point in my mind is, what parts of the rut do we see? And I think, the primary factor is weather. Here in the north, Mark, you're familiar with us being from Michigan, and so are you, Dan, hunting where you do. You get a string of 70-degree days, and you're not going to, I don't care if it's November 8th or 10th or whatever the peak breeding date is in your area, what you see is not going to be much probably.
Yeah.
Now I've seen days where bucks will chase does and their tongues are hanging out, and it feels like you're hunting in June, but that's been pretty rare in my experience. And conversely, we talked about this at the beginning of the podcast that, man, we've got a cold front coming, and a cold front can do absolute wonders. It can just kick bucks into totally high gear. So I think temperature is huge. Wind can put deer down, but I've also seen, windy days where it was just absolutely nuts, and I can't explain it. I've got a friend in Illinois, very successful buck hunter, and he's killed some of his absolute biggest deer on really windy days, and he uses those days to sneak into really sensitive areas like bedding areas, and he feels he can get in there and have his movement covered. And he says he feels like big bucks are more active on really windy days. And he feels like they're thinking the same way he is, that hey, I can be banging around here in the woods and nobody can hear me, and so anyway, that's something to think about. Not saying it's true or untrue, but anyway, the primary rule of the rut is, if you can hunt, you hunt. Doesn't matter what's happening.
Very true. Very true. Something on the same topic that we talked about last time, I think, Scott, is the moon, not in relation to the timing of the rut, but in how it might impact the timing of when deer move throughout the day. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you'd said that you've kind of adopted this as a pet project that you're kind of looking into a little bit more. Am I right on that? And if so, can you tell us a little bit about what you're starting to discover about that?
Yeah, you're correct. I am. I'm listening to what other guys are saying and starting to pay attention to it. It's been my experience that it seems like if the moon is visible in the daytime sky, that there seems to be a slight uptick in deer movement, and sometimes dramatic. And I've also read that if the moon is directly underfoot, that makes a difference as well. And so yeah, that is a pet project of mine. I think it's fascinating. I think there's I know it's kind of typical of biologists to dismiss things like that. However, I think, if you're a fisherman, there's days out there where you go and you can catch fish no matter what. They're just hitting, they're active, and you can go back, a week later to the same spot and what you think are similar conditions, and just nothing is happening. And I'm always fascinated by that. Something is kicking those fish into high gear that wasn't there before. And I think we've all had those days in the deer woods where you're like, holy cow, where were all these deer last week? They're running everywhere. And something is making them move. And I'm fascinated. I think the moon could be a factor.
Yeah, I've been definitely equally curious about that, and have been listening to a lot more people and just trying to take note of it more myself too. And like you said, it's an interesting one to try to connect those dots.
Yep.
And I've never noticed that until recently, until I started doing this podcast with Mark, that, okay, people kept bringing up the mood, and I thought it was just, I don't know, hearsay or just happened to coincide. But this year, when I've been out and these good moon days have fallen on the weekends during this early season, and that's when I hunt. And I've from what I could tell, they have coincided with what everybody said about the moon. So that's kind of interesting. I think it's definitely something that somebody should take into consideration, but not, throw all your cards on the table with it.
Right. Good. Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's a great observation. And Dan, were you paying attention to, a moon chart, or what was leading you to that, saying that, hey, this should be a good day for deer movement?
I saw a moon chart that me and Mark had talked about, and
Yep.
I just noticed it. I said, okay, well, here's what this moon's supposed to do. And sure enough, it was a clear morning, and the moon was, going down as the sun was coming up, and I saw a ton of movement that day. And it just so happened that I'm just like, maybe I should start, checking this out a little bit more.
Exactly. Yeah. It's fascinating. I mean, if there's some link there, it's worth exploring.
And definitely, we as hunters want to have every, any opportunity increase that's possible. So
Exactly. True. So true.
Now, let's talk scents a second. Do you create any mock scrapes or use any urine or drag lines when you walk into your stand, or let's say cover scent or anything like that?
I do. So mock scrapes, yeah. I will use any available, deer urine that I have, or I will even use my own. I don't think it doesn't make any difference. I think the bucks are. I'm no scientist, but I've heard that the basic smell of urine breaks down fairly quickly, and then pee just smells like pee. So anyway, I've had bucks hit mock scrapes that I've peed in all. I mean, I've just got picture after picture after picture. So that doesn't bother me in the least. I do drag lines once in a while. I will hang out scent wicks once in a while. So yeah, I mean, scents can work. It just depends on the degree to what, I think when you do things like that, like, drag lines and scent wicks and et cetera, you have to be careful. And so you have to make sure your own scent isn't mingling with that. And so it just depends on, I guess my basic philosophy is if I feel like being really careful that day, I'll do it. And there's some days it's like, you know what, I just want to get my butt in a tree and just sit there and, watch deer. And if I've got that mindset, I'm like, Bestul, you just better put scents away.
Now, a lot of you guys are familiar with the old hunting tradition of eating, some organ, the heart or a chunk of liver off the first animal you kill. I had that when I was a little kid, and it was a big deal. Organ meats were always prized by frontier people who knew the importance of getting a lot of different minerals and nutrients. And as often is the case, those guys were onto something, because organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. And you can get the same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil, made exclusively from regeneratively raised, grass-fed, and finished cattle. Heart and Soil's unique freeze-drying process means all those important nutrients are trapped in, ensuring you experience every one of the benefits of nature's superfood in a clean, convenient, taste-free capsule. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And make sure to use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. That's heartandsoil.co. Use the code MeatEater. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Now, on the other end, as far as us, the hunter, being as scent-free as possible, are you using anything like an Ozonics or Scent Lock or any scent elimination products?
That's a great question. We do a scent test for Field and Stream every year, and the thing, I'm just going to be total disclaimer. I was totally prepared for ozone to fail during this test. What we do is we use a drug sniffing dog that's trained to also track human beings. And he's really, really good. I mean, so we set up this thing called a box test. I don't know if you've seen the magazine or familiar with this test, but there's 6 different boxes, and, we heat up each box with human scent, and then we take every guy by putting a guy in there for a couple minutes, and then we take every guy out and we leave one guy in a box, and we set, then the handler, unleashes the dog and says, go find the guy, and then we time how long it takes the dog to find the hunter. And in our experience, we've done this for 4 or 5 years now, and we've tested pretty much everything. The 2 things that have performed the best, amazingly, are A, skunk scent was like number 2, and then B was a hunter using ozonics.
Not
there
surprising.
It is, Mark.
Yes, not surprising to you or me. Both Scott, both Dan and I use ozonics for quite
Is
a while
that right?
now.
Have you had good luck with them?
Very. I know that it seems like whenever we bring up ozonics, it causes controversy. People inevitably have complaints about it, or say they don't think it works, or it's too much technology, or different things. But regardless of any of that, I just cannot bring myself to not go out there with an ozonics unit after I've seen how it works. I mean, it's worked for me time and time again. I'm not saying it works 100% of the time,
Sure.
but it absolutely helps. I feel naked without it in the woods. I don't think I've been to the woods once on purpose without it. So whatever that's worth.
Very, very interesting. I mean, we were fascinated. I mean, as I said, we've done this test for 4 or 5 years now, and we've busted everything. I mean, we've made a lot of I don't know if enemies is the right word, but we've irritated some people within the industry because this dog is just, I mean, he's just, fail safe. I mean, he's gonna get you, and it's just I mean, we know no matter what you wear that this dog is going to get you. I mean, he can smell an ounce of cocaine wrapped in cellophane and stuck in a gas tank somewhere. So for crying out loud, he's going to smell a human being,
Jeez, yeah.
But even his handler and I, when it took this dog close to a minute, I think it was 52 or 50 seconds, and that was to find the guy. So we had, my test guy had showered. He had his clothes just washed in a no scent detergent, and then he just carried an ozonics unit with him into this box. And it took the dog close to a minute to find him, and the handler and I mean, we've kind of become just, jaded skeptics. And he looked at me and he's like, dude, I've never seen anything like that. He said, I hope drug dealers don't find out about that. So anyway, that is in no way, shape, or form a commercial for ozonics. I've never used one. I'm not connected with them whatsoever, but there's something going on there. And, equally fascinating, guys, was that my dad was another one of my, so the test before we had the ozonics unit, we used my dad, and all he had was clothing that was, I mean, it was not washed in anything except it'd probably been laying around since last hunting season. And so what we did there was we just threw his clothes into a plastic tub, and we, there's these ozone units where you can kind of like run a little tube into the tub and then just flip the thing on for a half an hour. And so we did that, and, it took the dog, I think it was 45 seconds to find him, that was really impressive to me, because there really had been no scent shower, and, nothing, no really big preventative measures. So there's something going on there with that ozone that really confuses the scent, which is, I think, pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
It's nuts, man.
So then I guess moving on from that, we always seem to do this. Me and Dan get on these talks about ozonics, and we can't help but talk about how well it works. And same thing, we're not trying to have a commercial here or anything, but it's just man, it really does work. But
I just love the science behind it.
Yeah.
Anytime, like I talked to Mark earlier today about potentially having a biologist on the show. It's because I want to know not necessarily about the products, but I feel that if a hunter knows its prey better, and not just like, hey, the rut is in November, but that this is how they smell, this is how they see, this is what causes this action, that we
Right.
can use that information to get a better understanding and how to predict our moves compared to their moves.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I mean, you can never know too much about deer. I mean, I don't know. I guess my overriding theme, as a hunter is, the longer I do this, the less I feel like I know. I mean, deer do things that surprise me all the time. But that said, it doesn't mean I'm not trying to figure them out 24/7.
Right. Right.
So, question then for you, Scott. This ties in a little bit towards this whole topic of scent, and that is decoying. I've done a little bit of decoying, and there's a whole lot of different ideas about what works, what doesn't work when it comes to decoying, and how to set up with the wind and making sure everything's scent free. But could you give us your thoughts on, if you decoy at all, and if so, what's the correct decoying setup look like?
Sure. Yeah, I have done some decoying. I've killed deer over decoys. It's one of the most exciting and dramatic ways to kill a deer, in my opinion. I mean, it's just something to see. But that said, because decoys are heavy and bulky, and I tend to hunt kind of remote areas, and it's a pain to carry them, I don't hunt them as much as I would like to or probably should. So with that qualifier, I will say, from my experience, you need an open area. I think deer rely on a lot of different ways to maintain contact with each other. They smell each other, they hear each other, they see each other. And one of my early years of decoying, I had a nice buck coming through an apple orchard that was on the edge of a ravine and in other words, a really good creek bottom funnel. And my stand tree that I had picked was not. I couldn't shoot to what I felt were the best trails. It was just a little bit too far, and so I thought, well, I've got this figured out. I'll put a decoy out, and if that buck should come down that kind of main trail, he'll see the decoy and come over. And so anyway, by golly, the deer came, and sure enough, he was using the main trail, and I was just licking my chops, thinking this is as good as done. And he got. And I kept thinking, well, he's going to come now, he's going to see the decoy, and he was giving no indication whatsoever he was seeing the decoy. And all of a sudden, he was getting, just on the fringes of bow range, and turning away, the trail was going to take him away from me. And then he saw the decoy, and he absolutely freaked out. It was not the size of it. I think it just totally surprised him that there was a deer there that he had not seen or heard or smelled. Huh. So, in my opinion, in my experience, and one experience does not a theory make, but I've read this from other guys and talked to other guys that in wooded environments, make sure you're in open timber. That was relatively thick area where I decoyed that buck in, and he did not like it one bit. I mean, it didn't freak out so that he ran out of there, but he jumped up, ran off a little ways, and he stood and stared at the thing like, where in the heck did you come from? And that was it. I mean, he just ambled off and was like, he didn't want to be near a deer that surprised him. And conversely, the deer that I have killed with decoys have been, they've had a long time to look at it, and they've, you can kind of see the tumblers clicking in their mind, like, what is that deer over there? Do I know him? And of course, the decoy is just sitting there staring at him, and I think it takes a buck kind of in the right mood. And the right spot in the pecking order to say, I don't like the way that dude is looking at me right now. And I killed one in Wisconsin here a few years back that came, 200 yards across a soybean field, and when I shot him, he was ready to clean this deer's clock, and it was just, he was a fighter. He was a fighting deer. We knew that about him. He was, parts of his rack were busted off, and he just was a ornery guy. And when he saw a buck he didn't know, he was ready to come get it. So yeah, I mean, decoying is incredibly effective. It's really, really exciting, but it's like every other technique. You got to kind of be smart about it.
Will you decoy at any time of the rut? Any time of these next 2, 3, 4 weeks, or is there a certain subsection of that timing that you're really going to possibly bring it out, if at all?
Oh, in my opinion, everything's better in the rut, early, in the first stages of the rut, and then as we kind of get into the thick of it, it's such a crapshoot. I mean, it so much depends on, what the deer has done and, where he is in the pecking order, who he's been fighting with, how many does he's had, is he tired out? So, yeah, I mean, I would say that, this Halloween time frame, first week in November, is awesome time for decoying. It's early in the rut. Deer are highly curious about each other. Very, bucks are acting very aggressive. It's in my opinion, that would be the best time.
Okay. Good to know. When I head down to Indiana, I'm definitely going to be bringing my decoy down there. From what I'm seeing, there's definitely a number of bucks that would be interested in starting a tussle. So I'm hoping to maybe make it work down there. And then definitely, after Indiana, I'll be heading out to my property in southern Ohio, and that's a spot where I use it. I tried once or twice last year on this property with it and never ended up seeing a buck when I had it out there. But I saw so many deer last year that were busted up. I mean, so many bucks that were missing tines, missing half a rack. It just seems like there's an inordinate amount of bucks just bruising each other up. So I'm excited to bring one out there and see what happens.
That sounds like a perfect scenario. Now, you guys, when you use a decoy, do you use scent with it? Do you rattle or call? What's your basic approach?
Yeah. So for me, and again, I'm not an expert on decoying. I just started using decoys last year, actually, because in Michigan, I've always thought of it as really taboo around here because just so super high pressure and such a low number of mature deer that I've stayed away from it. But in these other spots like Iowa or Ohio where I'm hunting now, decided I should start giving it a shot. And so from what I've picked up from other people that are much more experienced and smarter than me, what I've been doing is setting it up with actually one antler out of the decoy, so just a one antler buck. And I heard this from a guy named John Dudley, who just seems to see that he said that it just seemed to be that it was enough of an antagonizer for a buck that really wanted to come in for a fight. He'd be coming at it. But if it was a buck that was kind of on the fence, a one antler buck wouldn't be necessarily intimidating, so he'd still come in. So that was an interesting tip I picked up, and I've tried that. I'm not using any scent other than just making sure it's completely scent free. And I've been making sure that wind is blowing towards me from the decoy to me, so that when that deer, hopefully a buck's going to come in and try to get downwind, circle downwind of that decoy, that's when hopefully I'll be able to get a shot as he's circling in and facing towards that buck. That's the hope, is that he won't be able to catch my wind because he's just trying to get downwind of the decoy. So I'm definitely doing a little bit of calling and rattling too. So like I said, I haven't had a lot of experience with it, but hoping to have some good stories in a week or two.
Awesome.
Yeah, I pretty much dress up as a buck and run through the timber with my grunt call and just go crazy.
And it works in Iowa.
No, I don't use a decoy. I very rarely hunt field edges, so I just have never felt the need to have one. And the only time that I did ever, I think one season, I used a decoy, and it spooked more deer than it actually brought in, so I just kind of never picked it up again.
I got to believe, though, Dan, knowing where you hunt, of anywhere really, your area probably could work better than most. I'd be interested to see what kind of deer you could pull in if you gave it more chances, but I can understand why you don't want to use it too.
Yeah.
So Scott, I kind of want to work towards closing things up here because we've been using up a lot of your time here, and I appreciate that, especially during the hunting season and everything. I know you're probably sacrificing some hunting time to be with us here today. So that's
you know what? It's 70 degrees today, and the moon is in the wrong spot, so I'm not going to see anything anyway. I wasn't even going to go hunting.
All right, then we'll talk to you for another hour, all right?
There you go. Let's do that.
So last time we talked, Scott, I'd asked you what you thought, some of the most important things were when it comes to hunting the rut. And you had mentioned something that might be different than, what we usually read about in the magazines or see on TV, and that was patience. Can you talk to us a little bit about why you think patience or perseverance or mental toughness is so important during the rut?
Yeah, well, I've learned this the hard way, and I think if I was a better deer hunter, I wouldn't have to be so patient. I just go out there and kill them like you guys do.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's not the case.
Oh, but how many times have you experienced this? You get out there, you're in a spot, it's a killer spot, the sign is everywhere, the bucks are there, and you sit there and you sit there and you sit there and nothing's happening. And I don't care. I mean, I don't know. I guess there are guys that maybe their brains are wired different than me, but I get discouraged. Like, man, what am I doing wrong? I'm second guessing this. Maybe this buck isn't around here, or the bucks aren't around here, and it's, by golly, it's November 3rd. They're supposed to be running nuts. What's wrong with these deer? And it can get frustrating. And so, I guess the feeling that I've adopted over the last few years is, I'm gonna hunt my plan the best that I can. I'm gonna operate on the information that I have and that I think is right. And then, the deer got to do their part. They got to show up, and they don't always do what we think they're going to do. And that just seems to get played out time and time again. I mean, you can have a buck, you can have his core area nailed down pretty good. You can know where he likes to rub and scrape and feed and chase does, and he's still moving like a ping pong ball through there, and he's going to zig when you zag, and so you're just going to have to kind of grit your teeth and understand that, especially if you're selective about the buck you want to shoot at all. And Dan is, he's a better man than I. He'll go on a 1 buck mission and pass up booners waiting for the 200-incher, and I'm not that guy.
True story.
Hey, I tell you what, Scott, why don't you come hunt with me, and we'll see how many booners I got running around.
Well, if that's an invitation, I'll be down there.
Oh,
but no, so, and that happens. I think that mindset is important, not only on a daily basis, but also to recognize that the rut is a long process. And we talked earlier about time frames of the hunt, of the rut, and and what to do at different phases. And it's crazy. We go out there. If you guys are anything like me, you'll be going out there this next week and next 2 weeks, and we're jazzed up, we're ready to go, and we want it to happen. And all of a sudden, it's November 10th, and we still haven't tagged anything. And it's easy to get discouraged, and not only that, but physically tired. And we still got 10, 15 days of really good hunting ahead of us. So yeah, patience. It's important to pace yourself. It's important to take care of yourself, and get a lot of sleep and eat the right foods, because sometimes you just got to grind it out. I mean, we've all had those years where you go out there and they just run under you, and you tag one and you're done, and away you go. But boy, I'm learning. I'm an old dog now. I'm ancient compared to you guys. Those things don't happen to me much anymore.
Yeah, I think that's 100% where I'm at too with all this. It's especially if you're doing, what me or Dan, or probably you were doing too, Scott, like starting tomorrow. It's October 28th tomorrow. I'm going to be hunting every single day from October 28th through November 18th. And starting on November 1st, I'll be hunting all day. So 12 or 13 hours in the stand from the 1st through at least the 15th. And like you said, that's a absolute physical grind, and it's a mental grind too. And it's, for me, hunting the rut, I mean, there's only so many things you can do during the rut to put yourself in the position to succeed. And if you can handle the basics, from there, it's a mental game. I think for me, it's just, can you grit it out? Can you stick with your plan? Can you handle the ups and downs and the frustration and the long hours of monotony and nothing happening? And when things don't go as planned, you botch a shot, or you get winded, or whatever it is, things are going to go wrong. It's the question is, can you get back up from it, and can you keep on grinding, and can you keep on pushing? And I think if you can kind of weather that storm and push through that marathon, eventually, in most cases, you're going to hopefully have a chance. And for me, that's what the rut comes down to. I just look at it as a grind, and I prepare myself that it's going to be tough. It's going to be a challenge, but there's going to be some really, really awesome lifelong memories interspersed. And it's something I get excited about, and I'm just ready. Tomorrow it's going to start, and I'm just going to, it's slightly foreboding and kind of scary at the same time, because I know I'm going to go through a lot of early mornings and long days, but it's exciting too. So
that's an awesome attitude to have. And, it's I think it's an overlooked and underappreciated attitude. And, what I'm going to say, I need to preface first, some of my very best friends do outdoor TV, okay? So this is not a slant against outdoor TV, but I think, if you're like me, you watch those hunting shows and it's like, oh my gosh, these guys, they tell you what their setup's going to be, and we've kind of got this buck down here, and we've been hanging for him, and sure enough, within 20 minutes of TV time, the buck shows up and they kill him. And it's so easy to kind of get that kind of mentality in your head that, well, I've got a good setup, he's got to show up. But if you look at your own memory, it works exactly the same way as outdoor TV. We delete out the millions of hours that we sit out there and don't see a doggone thing. And when Mark or Dan, when I say, what's your best rut memory, man, you don't sift through, 25 days of seeing nothing. You tell me about the day that 5 bucks came blowing under your stand, chasing a doe.
Yeah.
So anyways, that's human nature to, not delete or to delete the low points and not forget, how much hard work it can be. But boy, it's rewarding when it finally happens. And I think the guys that are most consistently successful and gals, are the ones that they're just going to grind it out. They're just going to keep hunting no matter what.
Yep. I think if there's anything I would want our listeners to take away from today, it's that right there. It's, take as many of these tactics into the woods as you can, try these different things and hunt the pinch points or hunt the funnels or whatever it might be, and try the scents and the grunt calls and the rattling and everything. But if all else fails, if you can put your time in and push through the low points and the high points and everything in between, you can have some success this rut. So I love it, Scott. This has been awesome, and we're well over time here, longer than we usually go. But Dan, do you have one final question for Scott before we wrap things up here?
So today we've talked a lot about what to do and, got some of your opinions on that. Is there anything that a hunter or the listener of this podcast should not do, or anything that you feel is a game ruiner when you're out there?
Well, I think a lot of people, and I'm guilty of this when I was younger, was thinking, we equate the rut with chaos, and that, bucks are going to be doing stupid things, and they're going to be, acting abnormally, and we can get away with this and we can get away with that. And all I can say, based on my personal experiences, don't count on it. They're still deer, and the bigger the buck, the more mature buck you're hunting, he doesn't forget that his number one job on earth is just simply to survive. He never has that off his mind, except for those 30 milliseconds when he's got a hot doe in his sights and before he's got her pinned down and has no competition for her, and then he goes right back into that thing. So yeah, you've got to play the wind. Don't think you can get by with a bad wind on a stand spot just because bucks are acting crazy. They don't act that crazy. In other words, don't rely on luck. Keep hunting your plan. Hunt smart and hunt patient and careful, and it will happen.
Yeah. Awesome advice. Well, Scott, like I said, this has been an incredible conversation, and really, really appreciate you joining us. So thank you so much, and good luck this coming couple weeks.
Oh, you guys too, and I'm really honored to be able to have the chance to speak with you guys. And I don't know, just talking to you two gets me fired up and ready to go. So let's hit the woods and start sending pictures to each other.
That's right. That's right.
That sounds like a good plan. All right, well, we will talk to you soon, Scott, and thanks again.
Best of luck, you guys. Thanks so much for having me.
All right,
Yep.
Bye-bye. All right. Well, if you're like me at all, I'm sure you took a lot away from that discussion that you'll be able to apply to your future hunts over the coming weeks during the rut. But if you want more, we've got you covered. If you haven't checked it out yet, our Rules of the Rut 2.0 podcast series features today's guest, Scott Bestul, along with 15 other expert whitetail hunters like Dan Infalt, Steve Bartilla, and Chris Eberhardt, all diving into great depth into topics related to the rut, such as patterning bucks during the rut, mature buck behavior, the biggest mistakes made during the rut, how to interpret and utilize sign during the rut, and much, much more. The Rules of the Rut 2.0 podcast feature 3 full podcasts and nearly 3 hours of unique content that will not be aired here on the Wired Hunt podcast. It's only available in this special 2 ebook, 3 podcast package. So if you want to download the Rules of the Rut 2.0 books and podcasts, simply go to wiredtohunt.com/rulesoftherut to purchase your copy today. Now, in addition to this being, in my opinion, the single greatest rut hunting resource out there, your support also helps keep the Wired Hunt podcast on the air. So thank you in advance. Moving on, as always, if you've been enjoying the podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a rating or review on iTunes. We're almost to 100 5-star reviews, so if you have a second, feel free to help us push up and over that milestone. It would be awesome. Finally, we'd like to thank our partners who help make this show possible. Big thanks to Sitka Gear, Trophy Ridge, Bear Archery, Redneck Blinds, Carbon Express Arrows, Huntsoft, Lacrosse Boots, Big & J Long Range Attractants, and the Whitetail Institute of North America. That all said, thanks so much for joining us here today. The Whitetail Super Bowl is just ahead. The rut is here, and things are about to get crazy. I hope you got some serious time in the tree stand ahead of you, so get out there and enjoy. Good luck, my friends, and stay wired to hunt.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. You ever get that feeling the walls closing in, the concrete jungle suffocating you? You crave some wide open spaces, the chance to connect with nature, maybe in a spot all your own. Well, head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forests, mountains, streams, you name it. Search by acreage. You can search by location. You can search by the kind of hunting and fishing you're dreaming of. Land.com. It is where the adventure begins.